Welcome to the Central Illinois Business Leaders Podcast, where business owners, thought leaders, and community champions from across Central Illinois come to share their story. The Central Illinois Business Leaders Podcast. Anything less would be uncivilized.
What's up, Central Illinois? I'm Derek Hayden. I am not joined here by Garrett Ulmer today. He is out of the office, but we are going to go ahead and do the Central Illinois Business Leaders Podcast, powered by Zambu. Zambu is a delicious grapefruit or wildberry vodka-based spirit infused with a Brazilian buzz button. It's smooth, tasty, and leaves you with a signature tingle. Learn more at zambuliquors.com. Zambu, taste the tingle. All right, Central Illinois, I am joined by today's guest, who is the founder and managing partner of Triptych Brewing in Savoy, Illinois. Ladies and gentlemen of Central Illinois, please welcome Anthony Benjamin. How you doing, Anthony?
Hi, doing great.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks for joining us. We're excited to learn about a unique business here in Central Illinois and a business that I enjoy attending every now and then to taste some of the brews. But before we do, Anthony, I'm going to take you through our speed round, and the speed round is 6 questions, and the goal is to answer those in 60 seconds or less. No pressure. If you go 61 seconds, I'm not going to kick you off the show or anything. So,
Sure.
Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. What was your first concert?
Weezer,
Weezer. What is your favorite movie?
The Matrix,
Matrix. Favorite ice cream flavor?
Sorbet,
iPhone or Android?
iPhone,
That a boy. Favorite social media platform?
I guess Facebook kind of by default.
Okay, fair enough. And last question, why Central Illinois?
Central Illinois is just like a cornucopia of so many different people. You have the university here, which draws a lot of new people constantly, but you have people who have kind of moved here and stayed here. And so it just seemed like an area that was ready for had the culture necessary to support a small brewery like ours.
Awesome. Well, that was pretty painless. You did a pretty good job. It was a smoother speed round than some we've had. So nice work on that. So Anthony, before I start asking a bunch of questions, what I'd like to do is have you take us back as far as you'd like.
Sure.
Bring us up to speed with where you're at now, how you opened the brewery, why you opened the brewery, and where you're at today.
Sure. So I had moved to Central Illinois with my wife just after we had gotten married. We both graduated from Mizzou, the University of Missouri, Columbia. And I was an engineering person and she was an anthropology person. And she decided she wanted to go to law school. So she got admitted to the U of I law school here. And we came here and I started working for the U of I right away, doing computer stuff. And during that process, I kind of started brewing in my garage at home. I needed a hobby. She was spending a lot of time at the law library. I was sitting at home. We didn't have any children yet or anything like that. And so over the course of many years, I was brewing and getting into it. And a lot of people were asking me, well, is this something you're going to start a business with? Is this something that, you want to pursue professionally? And so there weren't a lot of places at the time to go brew at. So I kind of got more serious about it and started talking to some friends, and they had been talking about starting a brewery also. And so the three of us got together and started looking for spaces and looking for, kind of formulating a business plan. And that was back in like 2010 or so. And then around 2012, we finally found kind of a space we were happy with in Savoy. We went through a really long, protracted licensing thing and all kinds of other stuff. And then in February of 2013, we got it open and started the brewery. It was mostly taproom focused at first. It was really, really small. So we started with a 3-barrel system, which is approximately 93 gallons of beer every time I would brew. And now just the brew system alone is like 5 times bigger than that. But the amount of tanks and the amount of space that we have for beer is like 20 or 30 times what we started with. And so we've gone through a lot of expansions over the years. The 2 friends that I started with eventually decided it wasn't for them, and I bought them out. we've in all those expansions, we've gone through so many different things like promissory notes, royalty financing, 504 loans, a private placement memorandum. And so I've had to kind of step away from the part that I actually really love, which is the brewing part, and do more of just business day to day, like management and stuff like that. And I think that that's something you find often with a creative business. You start as a creative person and you expect to do the creative thing all the time, and that isn't usually what it is. And it's kind of the same thing as, it was kind of foolhardy to think that knowing how to brew beer would be a reason to start a small business. And especially like our structure is the worst of all the things. It's manufacturing, hospitality, and distribution all on everything. And so you have to deal with all of the worst parts of all of those with none of like the upside of any of them. So that's kind of where we're at now. We just a couple of years ago, we finished an expansion where we bought an 8,000 square foot building directly across the street from our original facility. So we own all of the real estate involved with Triptych. That's taken a few years to kind of pull together. And then, day to day, we're just brewing beer and getting it out there on the shelves. I mean, our beer is available in a ton of different like places that you would never expect to see, like a craft brewery from Savoy, Illinois. Every major grocery store you can think of in our kind of strip through Illinois here, and every liquor store, and beer cans in the stadium for U of I football, and cans in the State Farm Center for basketball.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's awesome. Well, that's a very cool story. So you answered one of my questions as you were talking through there. The question was, had you been brewing, like home brewing, and how long had you been home brewing? So did you have a lot of experience home brewing, or were you brewing on commercial equipment to get started?
I started home brewing, basically started with just straight from grain right from the get-go, and was kegging beer right from the get-go. And I was in the heyday, I mean, I was doing 4 to 5 batches a weekend.
Wow.
At a 5-gallon scale. And then eventually I increased that to like a half barrel scale, and just really kind of went through the brewing, trying to learn as much as I can, thinking that would somehow have application. But it really doesn't. The only real application is troubleshooting and kind of the iterative process really fall back on engineering 99% of the time, because the brewing at a small scale has so many different things that just don't even come into play on the scale that we're at now. And the kind of brewing at home and just putting it in a refrigerator and sharing with your friends whenever you want, it's a lot different than thinking about making a product stable enough to sit on the shelf at the local Meijer or wherever it's going to be.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of different things you have to worry about.
So you said it doesn't scale completely like home brewing to commercial brewing. Do you still use any of your basic recipes that you came up with when you first started in Triptych now?
Not really. I mean, there's a lot of conceptual ideas that kind of have moved forward with us. I mean, part of the thing is too, craft beer is this, especially folks that are really into craft beer, it's a really changing dynamic, and there's always like new styles and new trends. And so in the 10 years that Triptych has been around, there's hardly any beers of Triptych history that have survived that whole time, just because of consumers can be very not fickle, but just like looking at the next thing, and especially craft beer consumers looking for the next thing. What's the next new beer? And so for us to ever have a beer that lasts for 4 or 5 years even, which we have one now called Dank Meme that has been around for quite a while, but for us to have one beer like that is quite unique in craft beer landscape of these days anyways.
That's kind of the one that I always remember is Dank Meme. That's the one that
we sell a lot of it. We make a lot of it.
Do you really?
Yeah.
That's great. So what would you say is your most popular style of beer that Triptych sells and brews?
I think our most popular style tends to be hazy beer, hazy hoppy beer. It's beer that a lot of newcomers especially see kind of the IPA moniker on and worry that it's going to be bitter, but 99% of the time they're really fruity. They have flavor components that remind you of like juice. Everything in the process of those beers is made to mimic juice. And it's something that has kind of caught us by surprise. I mean, when I first started, we were really making really traditional styles. I mean, you come in here and we had a a brown ale and an amber ale and a oatmeal stout and a blonde ale. And nowadays you come in here and it's basically hazy IPAs and lagers. I mean, I look at the menu over there and it's there occasionally is a brown ale or something else that pops up, but that's the other big thing about running a commercial brewery. When you homebrew, you can brew whatever you want, and it doesn't matter. And this, you have to brew what people want and what people want to buy. And so a lot of times a customer doesn't understand that, and they come in and like, well, why don't you have more brown ales, or why don't you have more amber ales? And nobody buys those. We would make them if they bought, if they sold, we would make them. We don't choose. You want to stay in business, you gotta cater to the customer wants and sales.
Wow. So as you were talking about establishing the brewery, you mentioned some of the licensing process you went through. And I think a lot of people, maybe not a lot of people, but they just think that you just start a business and start selling beer or start selling whatever product you're selling. So what all licensing goes into a brewery? And I know that there's a lot of weighing and measuring and tagging. And can you kind of explain a little bit of that process?
Sure. I mean, alcohol is one of the most regulated industries in the United States because of our complicated history with prohibition and other aspects, tax aspects especially. And so there's a lot of oversight that goes into that. But for us also in Savoy, it's a pretty small town, and there is only a limited amount of commercially zoned real estate. And in that commercially zoned real estate, if you want to run a liquor business, if it's a manufacturer, you're selling liquor or whatever you're doing with liquor, you need to get a special license on top of that. So you have to get that first, and you go before the local village board and you explain to them what you're planning on doing, get your local liquor license. After you have that, then you apply for a federal brewer's notice is what it's called, and you give them a big diagram of your facilities and what all your processes are going to be, including how you're going to measure what beer you're making and how you're going to measure how much beer you've made and how you're going to pay the taxes ultimately. And then after you have that, you apply with the state of Illinois and tell them some of the same sort of things, and they come in and inspect it, and they also look and make sure that you're not secretly owning other parts of three-tier businesses. So if I owned a liquor store, you can't also own a brewery, a brewery of our structure anyways. If you own a distributor, you can't own a brewery. And so they go through all of that. And then once you have all of those licenses, then you can get started up. Then after the first month or so, they come and look at everything and make sure everything is as they expect. And so every month we send 2 reports to the state of Illinois. One indicates how much beer we've manufactured, and one indicates essentially how much beer we've sold. And then quarterly, you send something similar to the federal government, and you pay taxes on those. In Illinois, you pay some 60 some cents a gallon on the beer that you sell out of the facility. And federally, you pay $3.50 for every 31 gallons that you manufacture, up to a certain point, which is much bigger than what we would be. And so, you have to keep track of all of that so that someday when they come and audit you, you can say, okay, this is, these are all the records that support this. So luckily, computer background, all of our stuff's computerized. We have a cloud system that manages all of the production data, and all the brewers that are over in the production facility are keeping track of that electronically, because otherwise it would be impossible to have that paper trail. When we first started, though, it was just a spreadsheet. It was just me and a spreadsheet, and that's how it worked for a few years.
Very nice. So for you listeners out there, it's not just as simple as opening the doors and selling beer to people. There's a lot that goes on. I'm sure that was just one of the hurdles that you had to jump over before you started. Was there anything else that was a hurdle as you were growing the business that you're willing to share about?
Yeah, I mean, I think a manufacturing business is always all about working capital, and to expand, you don't realize, in a manufacturing business like ours, maybe at the end of a really good quarter without inflation, without COVID, and without everything else, you're netting like 15 or 20%. And so to build an expansion plan based on that is, very difficult in terms of, especially, you're putting out all the ingredients, you're putting out all of the money for the cans and all the other packaging materials and all of that. And it's not until you sell all of that you actually are getting that net anyways. And so over the years, we've just had to be, really creative and find, it's been really important for us to find a banking partner that understood that. And Busey has been a really great partner in all of that. Just understanding how a brewery works, how manufacturing works, and then also understanding like the various government programs, like the 504 loan program was instrumental in our last expansion. And then in conjunction with that, finding like a CDC that's going to be your sponsor for a 504. And so we found a great place in Springfield called Growth Corp that helped us through that. And so just, all of those things. And then, make sure you have a good attorney, because there's always going to be something related to that you need. And it's tempting to read through contracts on your own, but I've never had a time where that didn't come back to bite me. And so nowadays we always have, our attorney look through stuff. And it's those things are what I wish I had a time machine to tell myself. And 10 years ago is like, hey, make sure you do this, and, get the banking relationship going early, because you don't want to be at the last minute trying to get a banking relationship started when you need the money. You want to have it already started way before you need the money.
Right. Wow. So you mentioned that you've expanded into a new 8,000 square foot building across the street. You're going into stores. What extra equipment do you need? Obviously, it's a lot of equipment needed just to brew beer and serve it at your brewery. But then to manufacture it and put it in stores, what's that process look like?
So we have, a big brewing setup over there where we brew 1 to 2 batches every day. So that's 500 to 1,000 gallons of beer every day, 5 days a week. We don't brew Saturday and Sunday. And then inside of that facility, we also have several fermentation tanks and storage tanks, basically. And so there are like a dozen fermentation vessels that are each between 500 and 2,000 gallons each. And then 6 storage vessels that are each between 2,000 and 1,000 gallons each. And then we also have all of the equipment to package the beer in a sanitary and like quality ensuring way. So it's a automated canning line that takes cans off of a pallet, fills up the beer, puts the lid on, and then shoots it out the other side and gives it to an operator who then stacks it up and gets it ready to ship. And so when we can beer, we're canning about 24 16-ounce cans a minute. And we usually do a couple hundred cases of beer when we start up the canning line to do that. And we do that 3 or 4 times a week. And then in that process, there's a lot of testing equipment to verify that the beer is going in there without excess oxygen, without losing the carbonation. And so, just a little testing instrument for that sets you back like $16,000. And so,
cow.
Yeah, that's just one little piece of it. So, I mean, our balance sheet is with all this manufacturing equipment that's super specialized that, if we were ever to bite the dust, like you don't find just the guy down the street's not going to come and get all this stuff, And so it's something, they say it's a joke that if you want to make a small fortune in brewing, you take a large fortune and you start a brewery because it's very capital intensive. And it's just for nickels on cans of beer that you're selling,
Right.
So.
Yeah. And that's one thing, for those who have ever gone to a brewery, you see some of, at least the portion that is in the brewery where you're sitting, tap room, you can see all the vessels and, the temperature control and the, fermentation tanks and all that stuff. And then you go and buy, maybe 12 to 16 ounces of beer for $5-6 a glass. And you're like, wow, how much? It's just crazy to think. So to understand how well Triptych's doing to get out, grow as big as you've done, you've done something right. And it's cool to see you guys continue to pop up at stadiums and stores. And so that's very cool. So one question I have is, where did the name come from? What is Triptych Brewing based off of?
A triptych is a 3-panel or a 3-component artwork. And so as you can kind of see in the logo here, hops, grain, and water are the main constituents in beer. And so we had 3 ingredients in beer. We knew initially we were going to sell in Champagne, Urbana, Savoy. We had 3 partners initially. And so we thought that artistic kind of old world callback. And so in the old days, a monk would walk around between villages and towns with a triptych, and it would fold up on itself, and he'd unfold it, and it would show like a scene, maybe a canonization of a saint or like the crucifixion of the Christ or something like that. And he would share it with people. And when they came and looked at it, they would give him like an alm or an offering or whatever. And then he'd fold it back up and he'd go to the next town and do it again. And so in our kind of haughty, naive way, we thought we were bringing like the art of brewing to the area, and that, wanted to be artistic. And when we first started, we really were brewing a lot more old world kind of styles. And so we wanted to be rooted in that European tradition. And over time that's kind of evolved, but we wanted a name that had the roots at least. So that's where it came from.
Very cool. Very cool. So yeah, that's one thing that what's the German term for like the purity of beer? Like it's
Reinheitsgebot.
Yes. So
Yeah.
explain. I know a little. So I do some home brewing, so I
Sure.
understand brewing a little bit. But
So
explain that to the listeners.
The Reinheitsgebot is at its best a German purity law, and at its worst a taxing mechanism to make sure that barley was used for beer instead of like wheat and other grains. And so in the context of the time, there was a lot of things going on in Germany, and real beer was under threat and assault. And so a duke basically set this taxing law that said that only malted barley, hops, and water could go into beer. And they didn't know about yeast at the time. And a lot of people ask me why there's not yeast on our sign, but we think of yeast more as like a cooperative partner and not an ingredient. You can't just like drop it in and expect it to do its thing like you can with hops.
Sure.
And so, yeah, that Reinheitsgebot has been touted for 1,000 years now as the first food purity law, but it probably was the first taxing mechanism. It's similar to, how you can't put grain alcohol in beer because taxing mechanisms basically don't exist for the government to allow you to do something like that. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Very nice. So there's a few other terms that I know a lot of people who, go to breweries and try different beers that they have questions about. What is IBU? Can you explain that to people who, or maybe don't quite know, but yeah.
Yeah, an IBU is an abbreviation for International Bittering Units, and it's actually basically a measurement of when you take a beer and you do a complicated lab process on a bench process to separate out kind of the bitter components, and then you mix it with a reagent, usually isooctane, I think, is the most commonly used one, and then you feed it through a spectrograph. So it measures the UV light of the resulting mixture. And that measurement of UV light is then multiplied with some complicated math to give you an approximate calculation for how bitter a beer is. This calculation was invented like in the 50s, maybe even earlier. And so it is an approximation for how they made beer then and how bitterness was in beer then. It doesn't take into account a lot of modern techniques. And so when we first started, we had IBUs in all of our beers. Now we don't use them because it's such a poor representation of perceived bitterness in a person's palate. So a great example is you can make a beer that has 100 IBUs that doesn't taste very bitter, and you can make a beer that has 0 IBUs that tastes very bitter. The bitterness is literally, that IBU number is literally just a measurement of the utilization of hops in the beer. And so it's been kind of bent to represent bitterness for consumers, and it's really a poor indicator of that. But regardless, a lot of times if the IBU is higher, then you can expect that the beer generally should be more bitter to your palate.
One thing that I feel like when I go to breweries with people, they're always afraid to try dark beers.
Yeah.
So can you, I guess, demystify that myth a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of, especially in our area, I think there's a lot of kind of misunderstandings that darker beer is stronger beer, or darker beer will contribute to hangover the next day, or darker beer is a lot of those different things. And a lot of people point to Guinness as a great example. Guinness is so strong and it's so thick and whatever. And actually, a lot of times when you go to a bar, Guinness has less alcohol on there than most of the other beers, aside from like, Bud Light or Miller Lite. And so really that dark color just comes from the ingredients. And similar to how coffee is not particularly strong in terms of its like content of anything. It doesn't have any sugar in it, doesn't have anything. It's just dark colored like that. And so you can make a beer that's that dark color. You could make a light lager that looks that way and still just has the same kind of flavor and everything else. The darkness isn't what you should be really concerned about. Really what you should be concerned about is alcohol by volume and how strong the beer is. Because you can make a super light blonde colored beer that's 14% alcohol, and that's what you have to be concerned about. It's always the alcohol by volume, not necessarily the color. And I think the fun thing about going to a craft brewery, a small brewery, the idea you can get like small tastes, and it's really, like a buck or two, or, $1.50 to try a beer. And if you don't like it, okay, well, I'm sure you've spent $1.50 on worse things this week. And so, nothing ventured, nothing lost. And I think a lot of our customers, when they first came in, they're always skeptical about different styles. They've been skeptical about IPAs, and then they try ours and they're just like, wow, this is unlike any IPA I've ever had. This is so amazing. They come in next time, and they're just always having those. And the same thing with, Dank Meme is a hazy, it says pale ale, and a lot of people expect it to be bitter, but it's not bitter. It has a little bit of crispness. But I think that fun part of exploring craft beer is really what got me into it initially. But even if you're not into that, I mean, at Triptych, we have lagers that are just normal beer flavored beer, even. And I think one says on the menu, and that's cool too. I mean, those are more challenging, more interesting for me to brew these days than IPAs or stouts or the dark beer even. So.
Right. Yeah. It's like Anthony said, there's a lot of opportunity to expand your horizons when you go to a craft brewery, because you don't have to just try to order the whatever's most like Bud Light. Give it a try, give it a try. There's some good stuff out there. One question I do have written down before we wrap it up, Anthony, is do you source any local ingredients for your beers, or where do you get some of your ingredients from?
Yeah, it depends on the beer. I mean, over the years, we've used local barley, local hops, local fruit, local honey, herbs. I mean, all kinds of different things. And it really just depends on the beer that we're trying to make. A lot of times nowadays, if we're trying to emulate like a German or a Czech lager, we will import the barley directly from Germany or Czech. But a lot of the beer when we're making American styles it's grain from the Midwest, a lot from the Dakotas, malted usually, and Wisconsin is a big source of it. Sometimes there's a small malt house in Indiana that we use barley from. It really, for us, we're not necessarily married conceptually to like a specific like barley from 100 miles of the brewery or anything like that. For us, it's always been, what makes the best flavored beer and what is going to contribute the most to this end product. And that's what we're going to source, even if we have to go through a lot of hassle to find it or import it or whatever it's going to be. If it makes the best beer, then that's what we're going to use.
Awesome. So one last thing, I noticed that you guys do a lot of collaborations with food trucks and having them on site. For someone looking to maybe go try some beer and a local food truck, what nights do you typically have those food trucks show up?
The best thing to do is to check our website. There is a little schedule thing on there that shows all the food trucks, but generally it's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We always have a food truck here. And so Thursdays, we have a taco truck that's been in residence for a long time, probably for 2 or 3 years now. On Fridays, we have a wood-fired pizza truck that's also kind of been in residence for quite a while.
Cool.
Then on most Wednesdays, we have a place called Watson's Chicken. They have a restaurant in downtown Champaign called Watson's, and they do really good fried chicken, Nashville hot. And then Saturdays, it's kind of a grab bag. And even Sundays, sometimes a place will come. It just really depends on what their schedules are. Food trucks are very fluid, and they have a lot of things going on. They go to festivals and fairs and carnivals and all kinds of stuff. And so we're kind of at their mercy, to their whims, when they can show up and if nothing is broken on their truck and all that. And so the best place to look is our website, because we keep that up to date, even if something happens. But we also put events on Facebook for them too, usually.
Very nice. And what is the web address?
Triptychbrewing.com, TRIPTYCH brewing.com.
Awesome. And what location, if someone is visiting Central Illinois and visiting Savoy area, what location can they find you at?
Well, to have beer, I mean,
yes,
basically anywhere that's anywhere has Triptych beer. I mean, in downtown Champaign, we have a lot of favorite places to go: Seven Saints, Esquire, Black Dog. There are a number of places that have it, and I think that's the biggest thing for us is we've always wanted to be a partner to all these restaurants and bars, and we want them to succeed, because without them, we can't succeed, especially at the scale that we're aiming to be. And so we were very, very thankful for all the places that feature our beer. And it's many, many, many. So
Awesome. And if you're a Fighting Illini football fan, when you head to the stadium this year, make sure you
get a
order
can
a
of dank
Triptych
meat.
beer.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right.
Very cool. So other than the website and where they can buy your beer, is there anywhere else they could contact you or Triptych Brewing at, Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, you can always send me a message. My email is anthony@triptychbrewing.com, or I'm on Facebook. You could message me on there. I usually don't, I'll friend anybody that wants to be friends and talk about whatever you want to talk about. We've got a little bit of a social media presence also, this group called Triptych Brewing Behind the Curtain. And that's kind of a place where we have like 2,000 of Triptych's closest fans that sit there and find out about our newest releases and suggest beers we should make and kind of have the inside track on everything. So if you're curious, want to see what's going on in the inner workings of Triptych, that group is a good resource too.
Very cool. And for all you listeners out there, while you're following Triptych Brewing on social media, you can also follow the CIBL podcast on LinkedIn and Facebook. While you're listening on whatever podcast platform you're listening, please leave us a review. It's greatly appreciated. Until next time, Anthony, you've officially been civilized. Thanks for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Central Illinois Business Leaders Podcast. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/CIBL podcast. You can also follow us on LinkedIn. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. It's the civilized thing to do.